Tobias, thank you very much for joining us on this. Why don't you just kick off with a little bit of an introduction to yourself, your background, and where you're operating now with regards to sort of AI within private equity?
Yeah, very happy to do that. I'm Toby. I'm German. I'm based in London. I've been for a while. I've got a background in strategy consulting originally. I worked with Booz and then with McKinsey. Moved more and more to AI around like 2017, 18. Was at DeepMind briefly. Back then still at the non-technical side, and I spent a lot of time in grad school doing computer science and data science with the undergrads. After that, I was at Quantum Black for a few years. I led some of the bigger product teams there and set up the Gen AI teams when ChatGPT launched in 2022, 2023. Left in 2023 towards autumn, and have since in the last almost 2 years now basically started building my own advisory practice across startups and enterprise on Gen AI strategy, but also private equity. And I've done a good balance of projects now, both like diligence and how to invest in AI for fund operations, like how to make funds more effective using AI, but also, which I think is the focus of this conversation, on the value creation side, basically, which is how do you use AI to create equity value.
Awesome. So, I mean, like, there's obviously loads to sort of unpack there, but some of what you just mentioned was interesting, kind of looking at AI and machine learning back in sort of 2018, 2019. So before, I suppose, the kind of hype associated with AI after the release of ChatGPT. What were the kind of topics of conversation and what was going on with regards to AI and machine learning before ChatGPT came to the fore?
I think it was very different types of projects. I think it was a lot more machine learning, strictly speaking, like prediction use cases, next best action use cases, but it was all very enterprise. I think there was a correct belief that you need a lot of data to be able to predict anything, build and train custom models. It was very scientific. You had even Quantum Black reflects that where I used to work, which is like, traditional race sports and like people who are very good with statistics, data scientists, data engineers. There was a lot less software engineering. It was a lot less consumer facing. It was very heavy enterprise grade applications. And all of that has changed pretty much completely. I think unless you're working in research, the role of data scientist is gone. I don't think anyone working in AI right now needs to know very much about, or like a lot about statistics. It's all become a lot more software development heavy with like building web application. Everything is now on the web. Some companies still run models on-prem, but it's gotten very much common to call models via an API, which is very much not the case beforehand. Nobody's training their own models anymore these days, or very, very few people are. And overall, also, I think the barrier has become a lot lower. I think now, beforehand, for example, at Quantum Black, we did a lot of kind of cross-sell churn use cases for telcos or for big banks that have hundreds of thousands of customers, so you can actually train a model and get some meaningful intelligence around it. Whereas now, even automating quite small processes that back office teams of 25, 30, 40 people do are very much in scope, because the cost of software development has gone down, the type of project has gone down. Yeah, statistics has very much disappeared.
Yeah. What would a project back then have looked like? What were the key questions before the rise of sort of generative AI? What were the key things that a client might be looking at when engaging machine learning? Was it, typically a technical team? Was it more broadly accepted across like private equity value creation teams? Was it something on their agenda, or was it more specifically focused on, chief technology officers and product folks within big enterprises?
I think in private equity, it was a lot less common to spend a lot of time on data science. I think there were a lot of process improvement use cases around data platforms, around data harmonization, but not so much predictive or like fancy machine learning things, but very much like getting the bases in order, harmonizing ERP, harmonizing CRM data, that kind of stuff, particularly if you're doing like bolt-on M&A type strategies. I guess the team structures were highly technical, people with a data science background, often not traditional computer science backgrounds, but specialized expertise in statistics. People would really understand, does the use case work? Do we have enough scale? Do we have enough data? How do we clean the data? People could spend months just preparing the data to then run and train a model. Whereas now all of this is very different. I think there's a lot more AI. Then obviously there's an element of hype as well. there's a realization now there's a lot of value that can be captured from doing AI projects. The team configurations are very different. People are a lot less technical. There's much more a push towards software engineering. There's a push towards actually moving into production rather than spending months building or training a model. Now I think there's an expectation of things happen a lot faster. So I think there's also an appreciation, which I think wasn't really the case. I think there was a bit of a kind of deference to machine learning and statistics based on all the work that came out of DeepMind and like what some of the big enterprises were doing about the AI will figure things out. I think ironically now there's a lot more skepticism. I think there's a big drive towards domain expertise and domain knowledge and combining that. And so I think the teams today know less about statistics and less about machine learning, but a lot more about software engineering and data engineering, and a lot more, I think there's a lot more of an appreciation that you do need domain knowledge and people to understand the business and the business problems and the classification tasks.
Yeah. So sort of, fast forwarding to, the inception or kind of commercialization or, more and more consumers using ChatGPT and where we're up to today. And I suppose thereby the expectation that everyone has with regards to things like automation, etc. Where do you see the big opportunity for private equity funds now on the topic of AI when it comes to value creation?
I think there is at least two. I think one, particularly in software and services businesses, is that you can take a lot of cost out by replacing or augmenting a lot of the tasks that humans do, particularly in like kind of more kind of traditionally like low value white collar work. So everything that involves classifying data, putting data, formatting data a certain way, moving it from A to B. If it doesn't require a lot of judgment calls, there's a lot of value to be captured around property management, for example, around managed service providers, around tax custom declarations, all these kind of tasks that seem like admin around compliance, where people spend a lot of time filling in forms or formatting data a certain way. There's a lot of room to make companies more effective and efficient by doing that. I think by now, also most of the models are good enough. And so these projects have become somewhat more predictable than they were even like a year ago, because the models have gotten a lot better, the tooling, the infrastructure has gotten a lot better, and people have a better understanding what the use cases are. One particularly big one is customer support, customer service, everything that involves chatbots already that humans used to monitor. Now obviously AI can do that pretty well, at least for early or low level support. So I think that's one big one, and everything around that, like back office, middle office, etc., there's loads of opportunities. Second, and probably a little bit both bigger but also harder to capture, is the product opportunity. I think pretty much everyone has seen some of the big startups and big companies coming out at the back of the AI hype wave, from OpenAI to Anthropic and the big model providers, but also like application layer companies like Lovable or Bolt and all of these have grown really, really quickly. And there is a big fear for private equity owned companies that new AI first or AI native competitors might eat their lunch. But of course, there's also on the flip side of this, there's a huge opportunity, which is you could maybe eat your own lunch or just expand, particularly in software, the total market, since software markets seem to be eating, or software spend starts to eat into services spend. If beforehand you needed to pay someone $3 or $4 to validate that you have a valid passport, or to process that to validate your driver's license, now it's conceivable that an AI can do that, and of course it costs a fraction. But also it means as a software vendor you can charge more for that service, and the margins are better. So the product opportunity is also really big, but I think private equity funds have been a little bit less bullish in taking it on, since it's more complex and involves much more organizational change as well to field an AI first product, as opposed to incrementally improving the operations of an existing company.
Yeah, yeah. I think with regards to sort of where we see things move me on within our private equity team, it feels like there's lots of interest in the prospect of approaching AI exploration topics. What are the use cases? What are the opportunities for operational efficiency across portfolio companies? What are the opportunities for enhanced, product development, etc.? To what extent have you felt like there have been some real use cases and stories that have captured value when it comes to transformation? Because as I say, it feels like a lot of the thinking at the moment is more at a conceptual level, as opposed to a let's roll out a major transformation program in order to implement this and thereby capture additional value?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the specific use cases. I think the most mature ones are customer support. I think that's the biggest one. There's also good vendors already in the space that enterprises can use and they see real uplift in deflection rates, real uplift in the number of tickets that AI can resolve autonomously as opposed to humans. And of course, for enterprises, for existing companies, the change management, the process management is always something that, like the adoption is something that, lags behind where the innovation is. But you can really see where the space is going by, for example, OpenAI itself or Lovable have automated most of their own customer support. You can still chat to what feels like a human, but most of it is fully automated. And of course, not every PE-owned business is there yet in the adoption, but I think these are some of the projects in customer support that really drive value. Similarly, in like more services type businesses, a lot of the core operations that involve, for example, in insurance brokerage or in property management services or managed service providers, a lot of industries or a certification audit, these kind of type workflows that are quite predictable, have some element of judgment domain knowledge applied, but are really repeatable and like follow clear rules and guidance. Tax advice is another really, really good one where these things are complicated, but they're predictable and they follow rules where, there's some really, really impressive case studies already in terms of what the value is that can be captured.
And sort of, let's say you're a PE fund, you're looking at exploring some of the use cases you just mentioned, whether it be customer service or back office automation or whatever it may be. You're looking at building a sort of mini squad of capability to approach that, to evaluate the use cases, the the potential EBITDA save that might come as a result of that. You're trying to build together this team. What would a squad look like for you? What kind of resource or knowledge or skill set would you need in order to put maybe an MVP together and start looking at implementing something that could capture value like you just mentioned?
Yeah, I would flip the question around a little and think that the first thing I would advise a fund to do is to not necessarily default to building in-house or hiring engineers or people who can build or teams that can build, but to start with raising awareness and building sponsorship and conviction in the leadership teams in their podcasts. Because also many of the PE funds, their podcasts have a lot of capabilities in-house already that could be leveraged for that. And sometimes defaulting to building too quickly can also mean that the business is not on board or all sorts of other problems arise down the line. So I think there's a lot to be said to understanding the market, understanding the opportunity, and having a lot of almost like change management and conviction capabilities in place to basically understand what the opportunity is and help bring people along. So I think there's a huge piece. But then to actually answer your question, what does the actual team look like? I think if you go down the path where you've decided, yes, there's a valuable business, a valuable use case, and you have sponsorship, and yes, you want to build this in-house, and there's no good solution in the market where you could buy this from, you can start very, very lean. Have maybe one or two full stack developers. I think there's a shift away from back and front end, particularly that front end is now more or less for most kind of enterprise applications fully vibe codable. Have one or two full stack developers, maybe one person who really knows AI evaluations and can set up a production grade evaluation system for the AI. Maybe bring a domain expert or like a domain knowledge person from either from the podcore or from the domain that can be part-time, and have one person like a product lead or product owner who can drive the whole effort and make sure all the stakeholders are on board. So like 3 to 5 FTEs if it's something more complex. Maybe add a designer, add DevOps, add a software engineer, and a tech lead. But I think it's the teams are becoming smaller.
See, it's interesting. A lot of the basically all the folks that you've just mentioned on that project team are quite technical. Obviously, you yourself, you have a initially strategy consulting background with McKinsey, then subsequently Quantum Black. A lot of the folks that are going to be engaging in this content by virtue of Move Me On's network will have a strategy consulting background. They'll either be in consulting or be post consulting. What do you think is the role for the strategy consulting houses when it comes to AI advisory? And are the big projects around AI transformation going to ultimately go to more technical folks, or will the strategy houses be involved in some capacity?
maybe I'm biased here, but I do think there's a huge role for this. Maybe not. I don't know about whether there's a huge role for the strategy houses, but for the strategy folks, definitely. In that, one of the things I consistently see go wrong is that projects are not scoped appropriately or are not managed in the way that expectations are managed and set right with particularly non-technical stakeholders. So I think often, sometimes what I like to say to my clients is that, like, one of my main skill sets is that I can tell people, what takes 2 weeks to build, what takes 3 months to build, and what is a Series B startup, or what might be impossible. And I think you need technical judgment, and I think a lot of the strategy people or the more strategically minded people are able to extract that from like a 30-minute, 2-hour conversation with both domain knowledge people, but also with the technical folks. But it's still very much like the business case needs to stack up. And identifying the use cases and understanding what is possible requires a certain level of, I'm not even sure whether it requires technical understanding, but it requires an understanding of what AI is capable of and what it's not capable of and what it takes to build. But very much bringing all of this together and understanding like what it takes on the resourcing side, what the business impact could be, and bringing in the technical bit as one piece of that, I think is still very much like a role that is required from like a strategy person or like a person with that skill set and background.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You see the likes of Palantir and OpenAI launching these kind of consulting practices, which appear to effectively be a blend between traditional consulting types who might be engagement managers and leading the projects, and I suppose leading some degree of evaluation of the efficacy of the use cases, but ultimately underpinned by highly technical folks that can actually build the MVPs and build the internal products.
Yeah, that seems right. And I think, again, maybe I'm biased here, but I do think that what some of the more technical vendors lack is the ability to bring it all together, to articulate business value, and to also convince stakeholders that there is business value. And so I definitely think there's a role for the strategy people, if only in transformation management, change management, process. And in that way, I think actually all of the AI projects or the challenges look very much the same from any other kind of business change process or business change project, which takes a lot of work and effort.
I suppose just to sort of like wrap things up, from your standpoint, obviously subject to change because it's such an ever-evolving kind of space, but what is your prediction for the next 5 years in this space? Where do you see the big use cases? Do you think there's going to be any particular current areas of business that are going to be entirely changed? It'd be great to get a take on you as to where you see things going.
I maybe slightly to take a slightly contrarian position. I actually think that we're gonna fall off the AI hype cliff in maybe a year or so. That many companies, particularly as we touched on earlier, have started building or trying to hire engineers and build things themselves, will be very disappointed because they don't see results, or they haven't seen results, either because the use case was poorly chosen or was more expensive than they thought, or for whatever reasons. So I think we'll see less kind of we want to do AI type use case enthusiasm. But then similar to the smartphone, I think there's going to be just adoption is going to ramp up gradually through new startups that like start working AI first, through companies that do adopt. And 5 years from now, a lot of things will just be table stakes. And some companies, of course, will lag behind and will not adopt and will survive. But I think that it's going to be a end of the hype. But as with a little bit less of the noise, I think the models will keep getting better. A lot of the infrastructure is going to be in place. And also people will get better at identifying the use cases. And then I think we'll see a couple of companies that are a lot better than current companies in terms of processes, in terms of how they organize themselves, in terms of support, in terms of finance, in terms of cooperations and data. And that's just gonna accumulate over time. And so in the medium term, we see a lot of adoption and a lot of innovation and change. I think I'm a little bit more skeptical on the short term.
Yeah, okay. No, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, from my standpoint, I feel like primarily the conversations I remain to be having are as it relates to chief transformation officer. Obviously here at CFO is a big lever that PE funds can pull by way of sort of talent in portfolio companies. And at the fund level, there continues to sort of be a demand for, I suppose, more generalist profiles who can speak around these types of different topics. As opposed to huge investment at the moment in AI transformation programs in portfolio companies. That might change soon, but for now, I certainly see a high degree of interest. but the interest appears to be more around exploration as opposed to heavy duty transformation as things stand.
That sounds about right.
Cool. All right, Toby, Tobias, thank you so much for taking the time and talking us through this. Really, really interesting and insightful. And yeah, let's speak again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.